My name is Jenny Gable. I was born in Richland in 1945. I lived at 1506 Kimball until I was 19 years old. I had numerous health problems as a child, but a lot of, I don't know where to start. I started menstruating when I was in the second grade, and I was wearing a bra by the time I was in third grade. By the time I was in sixth grade, I was a double D, and I had to have a cyst removed from my breast. And I just don't know, even know what to talk about. I don't. Um, I grew up here. There there were a lot of things different after I left this area and started talking to other people that made our childhood here a lot different. We had, it was a government-owned town. You had your house painted every year. If you needed furniture, it was available. My father worked out in the area. He had numerous health problems. He was off work for 6 months with full pay. There were these little metal cans that they used to set out in front of, on the front porch when your dad came home from work. You knew that something had happened at work because he had to fill up the jar and put it in the little metal cans outside the house. Walking home from school, you would see these moving trucks, and they'd be picking up furniture out of people's houses and bringing them new furniture because their dads had brought home contamination into their house. I went to Jason Lee Elementary School, and right outside of our school was a tall tower, and at least once a month the sirens would go off and we'd have to do these drills. It was, and yet it was a good life. Our parents made good money here, and we were stable. I don't know how else to put that. After I graduated from high school, I was 21 years old when I got married and had a child, and I had complications during both my pregnancies. And when I was 26 years old, I had to, right after my second son was born, I had blood clots in my lungs. And then when I was 26 years old, I had to have a complete hysterectomy. And 9 months later, I had to have my gallbladder removed. I have never really been a healthy person. Then when I turned 50, which I thought was really rude of God to do this to me, I developed breast cancer the same year. And I went through radiation treatments, and it killed out my immune system. And because of that, I'm now a diabetic because of the different experimental deals that they've tried me on to build up my immune system. And I can't work. I can't concentrate very well. I don't, I'll start reading a book, and I love to read, and I'll be reading it, and I won't even remember what happened 2 pages before then. And so I have to go back and reread, and it takes me forever almost to read a book now because of that. I I have 4 brothers, and the brother that's 5 years younger than I am has had terrible, terrible stomach problems ever since he was an infant. And we grew up in this area and would go to the orchards out by Hanford and pick apples and peaches, and we would eat the asparagus, and my dad fished and hunted, and of course the milk issue from the dairy farms around here. It just all seems to me that how my mother in 1948 during the Sea of Green, my mother suffered a terrible miscarriage, and then several months later she started hemorrhaging, and she was taken to Cadillac, and the version that I've heard is that the men from out at work stood in line to donate blood for her, and they never did figure out what caused that. My mother, when she was 65 years old, developed cancer of the lymph node gland in her neck, and it was it was just part of the cancer history. My dad had cancer of the intestine, and he had he lost a testicle. He had numerous health problems. He had his gallbladder removed when at a young age also. It happened when he was at work. He had a really bad attack, and they put him in the hospital and removed his gallbladder. My dad had his theory about Hanford and all this kind of stuff that's going on now with the interviewing and them trying to locate the deposit sites out in the area, is that the government is looking for scapegoats for a lot of it. But before he passed away, he did express to me his concerns that he had about just what effect all of this will have on our future generation around this area. And I never thought that much about it until 3 years ago my granddaughter was born. And I just look at all the possibilities of what I could have maybe passed on to her. Just because I was born here, I lived through everything that, went on out there. And they talk about all the stuff that they did, and it was like, my dad brought that home a lot. And that really does bother me. He's, my dad was a wonderful man. He would not have deliberately have done anything wrong. And I look back and I go, but they didn't know. But they did know. They knew the problems that were going to arise from all this. And anyway, I have this 3-year-old granddaughter, and I run cysts really bad, and have ever since, like I said, I was a young child, and she has one on the side of her face, and that just, and I'm wondering, how much of this is really heredity and how much of it is caused from overexposure to what all they did out there. The tower that was at Jason Lee's school, they said that was for air raid. But now when I read about things, those towers were set up for air evaluation, and whenever the air was contaminated, those towers went off. And when I grew up, Jason Lee was Van Giesen, those houses weren't over there. That was just a fill, and then they had their, stuff. My dad used to come clear into town to test water. Um, so they talk about downwinders, and they don't include us in downwinders because we lived in it. It blew from my house to theirs, but um, I look at then my friends and their fathers, and I lived next door to a man. His name was Mitch Bailey, and he was a very nice man. It's probably why I have this collection of Betty Boop dolls. Is because he had Betty Boop tattooed on his arm, and he used to make in a hula skirt, and he used to make her dance. Anyway, by the time I was like 9, 10 years old, he'd had both legs and an arm amputated, and I'll always wonder why. That was so. And he passed away, and I can remember going to his funeral, and it was like, now when I think about him, I wonder what happened to him out there, and if I shouldn't have looked at some of those records that I had access to find out about the exposures. And DOE with the state of Washington set up, special compensation for these workers that were exposed, and they've got the files on all those people that were exposed out there. And I think that needs to be made totally public, and for children, for people like me and Roberta and other kids to know just what happened to their parents out there, and if it is going to reflect on their health in later years, and my brother Don once told me, when my son Bill was born, I went to this little town in Seattle. It was called Riverton, and it was just when computers came out, and they took all my information to put me on this database on this computer. And my brother Don said that I didn't ever have to worry about that I was being tracked anyway, that the government knew exactly what was going on with me health-wise all the time. And I know that sounds like he was being paranoid, or that, but I believe that today. They have to have that information on all of us. We were their experiment, is how I feel. They didn't know, so let's find out type deal. So, but it's like I was talking about, when I was in 2nd grade, I started administrating. I was 8 years old, and then I was wearing a bra the next year. I don't know very many 8-year-old girls that ministrate, and I don't know very many 9-year-old girls that wear bras. And because of all that, I was an outcast girl. Well, the day that I started ministrating, I was over at my friend's house, and we were playing, and I went to the bathroom, and there was blood, and I sent her downstairs to get a Band-Aid from her mom, and her mom came upstairs. I was never allowed in that girl's house again. She was no longer allowed to be my friend. I couldn't shower with the other girls at school in PE because I was developed. I went to a basketball game to watch my brother play basketball one time, and this man says, "I bet she's never seen her feet." And he was probably right, and I was in 6th grade. It's just not okay. I wonder about that. I wonder about the sea of green. I wonder about the other exposures that went on here and wonder if that didn't play a part in my early development. And then I look at, okay, a hysterectomy, complete hysterectomy at the age of 26. You know, there's not very many of them out there that ever, that went through all the medical problems that I did at such a young age. You know, those are things that happen to women in their 40s, you know. And so I figure I probably have another 2 years left if, you know, my body should give out on me just about 2 years from now, because then it'd be like I was 80. See? Everybody worked at Hanford in Richland. You had to work out at Hanford to qualify for the housing in Richland.
Okay.
So everybody's father worked out at Hanford, and some of the mothers did too.
Mm-hmm.
They did. My dad, like so many other fathers, made mouse traps. My dad never talked about his work. When he was asked what he did, it was he made mouse traps. Later, though, my dad was he actually did custodial cleanup type work on the reactors and things like that. And like I said, he would, whenever the metal box was out on the porch, that meant, he came home, he'd been scrubbed down. I can remember one time when he came home in a pair of overalls because they had taken his clothes and shoes that weren't his. I was sitting outside when he was walking down the street, and that's not how he'd look that morning when he went to work. A lot of that stuff just wasn't talked about. It was like I said, I'd be coming home from school and there'd be these moving vans taking furniture. I dated a boy when I was a sophomore in high school, John Dale, and they got all new furniture, and carpets were torn out of their house, and that was when I was a sophomore in high school. So that was after. When was Richland sold? When did the government sell Richland to Richland?
I can't remember that stuff.
58?
Close.
So this is probably in 60. And they came in and completely tore up the carpeting, everything out of his home. And bought them all new furniture and redid the carpeting and everything. His dad had brought something home. And something is the right word to use.
Nobody ever talked about it, or you didn't really know specifically.
No, in
They
fact,
always would reassure you that it was no harm here, nothing to worry about.
right, yeah. It was a way of life here. That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
How often did you see trucks moving new furniture to your? Was it like a once a month occurrence that you'd see somewhere in the
At
neighborhood?
least. At least.
How about with the seeing the cans? How often did that happen at your house? How often did that happen in the neighborhood?
I can't remember, but it happened a lot.
I can't remember there not being a can on somebody's porch.
Yeah, every day. That's what yeah.
And this was in the 40s, 50s,
50s,
Yeah.
into the 60s?
into the 60s. Yeah. I can't remember it not being there. I mean, we didn't have one on our porch every day,
Yeah.
but
Somebody did.
The can is for a urine sample, right?
right. Uh-huh.
What was the sea of green you mentioned?
Is that the Green Run? Is that what you were
Yeah.
referring to?
They,
You refer to it as
the sea of green. Right, that's what my mother called it.
You won't find too many Hanford people that worked out there call it green when it was sea of green.
Oh,
It's a sea of green.
That's the true terminology.
I guess I was 3 years old, and I guess it turned the sky green.
Yeah.
literally.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I wasn't
Yeah.
around then.
And you know, sometimes when I see green in the clouds, I wonder
Yeah.
just what's going off out there now. Sometimes we get green in the clouds here today.
Maybe they're continuing the experiments.
Sure.
So-
But you know, the thing is, it was the sky was green, and it was called the Sea of Green. We're not talking about little specks. My mother told me that the sky was green. The river reflected, turned green because the sky was green. There was so much radiation that went up in, or whatever it was that they want to tell us it was, that went up into the air that day that it literally turned our sky green.